The low creak of my beach house floorboards gave them away, as I stepped inside and saw strangers measuring my walls. Still, I kept my breath steady, running my hand along the railing I built with my wife decades ago. As that same creak echoed again, it felt less like a warning and more like the house asking if I was finally ready to fight back. While their voices filled the rooms, the wood beneath my palm reminded me who this place truly belonged to. The same sound that once meant home now clarified their betrayal. That's when I decided, if they wanted to take my life apart, I'd rebuild it piece by piece, without them. Before the story begins, tell me, where are you watching from? I hope your day's gentle and calm. Please like, subscribe, and let's start our story together. Frank Wallace eased his truck off the narrow coastal road and let it roll to a quiet stop in front of the weathered wooden gate. The late summer sun hung low over the Carolina shoreline, throwing long streaks of orange light across the sand. For a moment, he simply sat there, hands resting on the wheel, letting the familiar sound of the tide unwind something tight in his chest. The beach house stood exactly where it always had, solid, sun-bleached, patient, like it had been waiting for him. He stepped out slowly, the boards of the small walkway groaning under his boots the same way they did 20 years ago when he and his late wife, Caroline, had first carried lumber across them. He paused at the base of the stairs, running his palm along the railing he'd carved by hand. He could still feel the rhythm of the work he once put into this place. The hammer strikes, the smell of sawdust, Caroline's laughter drifting from the porch as she painted the trim. The memories didn't hurt anymore. They just lived in him quietly like warm embers. He climbed the steps, unlocked the door, and pushed it open, breathing in air that tasted like cedar, salt, and something that felt a lot like home. Mia's car pulled in behind his just as he stepped inside. He heard her soft footsteps on the porch before she called out, "Dad, you didn't tell me you were coming here today." He smiled when she appeared in the doorway, wind-tousled hair, sun in her cheeks, the same steadiness her mother once had. "Didn't plan it," he said. "Just felt like checking on the place." Mia glanced around, noticing the slight layer of dust on the counter, the untouched cushions on the sofa. "Mom would have loved that you still come here," she murmured, then added more quietly, "Linda still hasn't come with you, not once this whole summer." Frank exhaled through his nose, not angry, just tired of making excuses he didn't believe anymore. "She says the place gives her motion sickness," he replied, half shrugging. "Or that it's too far, or too quiet, depends on the week." Mia stepped closer, studying him with that perceptive look she inherited from Caroline. "Dad, she's never liked this house. She barely pretends to hide it." Frank didn't disagree. From the first year of their marriage, Linda had treated the beach house like an unwelcome guest, something to tolerate but never appreciate. She'd call it Frank's old shrine, or roll her eyes when he mentioned maintenance. It wasn't hatred exactly, more like resentment or jealousy. The house was a symbol of a life she never got to shape. "She wants us focused on the main home," he said simply, "on building a future together." Mia's expression tightened. "And on the finances, because she's been asking me questions she shouldn't, about the house valuations, about your accounts, about who gets what if something happens." She folded her arms. "It's not curiosity, Dad, it's planning." Frank tried to wave it off, though her words landed heavier than he let on. "You're reading too much into things. She's just trying to understand how things work." "Dad," Mia's voice softened but her eyes didn't. "Just watch your paperwork, please." Frank nodded, but only because he didn't want to argue. In truth, a faint unease had been growing inside him for months. Small things, subtle shifts, moments that felt slightly off but never clear enough to name. He pushed them aside the way he always did, convincing himself that marriage required flexibility, patience, and trust. And he did trust Linda, or at least he had trained himself to. They spent another hour walking through the house together. Frank checked the windows, tested light switches, ran his fingers along the doorframe he'd built the night before Mia was born. Being here always settled him, grounded him. But today, The piece felt thinner, like something was brushing against the edges of it. As the sky darkened, Mia hugged him goodbye and drove off. Frank stayed a while longer, sitting alone on the porch, letting the waves break in steady rhythm. The unease returned, sharper now, but he pushed it away again. He locked up, climbed back into his truck and started the drive home. Halfway there, his phone rang. And Linda's name lit up the screen. He answered with a gentle, "Hey, sweetheart," but her tone cut immediately into him. "You went to the beach house today," she said, not quite yelling but close, her irritation crackling through the line. "Why would you go there without telling me? You know how that looks." Frank blinked, surprised. It was just a quick check-in, didn't think it mattered. "It does matter, Frank," she snapped. "Next time ask. I need to know where you are. We should be making decisions together." The call ended abruptly, leaving a hollow quiet in the cab of his truck. Frank stared at the dark road stretching ahead, headlights sweeping over pine trees. Her reaction didn't fit, not for something this small. For the first time, the unease inside him didn't drift away. It settled, heavy, certain, though he still had no words for what it meant. Not yet. Frank walked into the kitchen the next morning expecting the usual quiet start to the day. Instead, he found Linda already dressed, arms crossed, her expression coiled tight. She didn't greet him, didn't smile, just stared. "So," she said, "you spent the whole day at that beach house again." Her voice carried the same clipped irritation she'd used on the phone the night before. "You know, Frank, most husbands try focusing on their marriage, not running off to some place that doesn't matter anymore." He poured coffee slowly, telling himself not to react. "It does matter. I built that house. It's part of my life." Linda scoffed. "It's a distraction, a monument you keep polishing instead of working on us." She leaned on the counter, narrowing her eyes. "Every time you disappear there, you pull away from this marriage." Before Frank could respond, footsteps thundered down the hall. Tyler and Brooke, Linda's grown children who never bothered knocking, strolled into the kitchen like they owned the place. Brooke grabbed juice from the fridge. Tyler opened cabinets like he was inspecting inventory. "Did you see the beach house yesterday?" Tyler asked Linda casually, not even acknowledging Frank. "Mom, if the siding is still in good shape, we won't need much work done before." "Before what?" Frank cut in, turning fully toward them. Tyler smirked. Brooke looked away but didn't hide her satisfaction. They spoke about his property as if it were already in their possession, as if Frank were simply holding it for them until they decided to take it. "It'll be ours one day," Brooke said lightly. "That's what family assets are for." The words hit Frank harder than he expected. "That house belongs to me," he said, his tone sharper than usual. "And it was built with Caroline, your mother," he added, looking at Mia's photo on the kitchen shelf. "It's not something you get to claim just because your mom married me." Linda's face tightened instantly, her eyes flashing with something between anger and wounded pride. "There it is," she hissed. "You just had to bring her up, didn't you?" Frank stared at her, stunned by the sudden venom. "You're living in the past, Frank," she continued, voice rising. "You keep dragging your dead wife into our marriage like I'm competing with a ghost." Frank set his coffee down too hard, the ceramic clinking sharply against the counter. "I mentioned her because that house came from a life I worked hard for. That doesn't erase the life I have now." But Linda wasn't listening. She stormed out of the kitchen, Tyler and Brooke following behind her like a pair of shadows. Their whispers carried down the hall, accusing, entitled, confident. Frank stood there alone, the silence thick and uncomfortable. A few minutes later, Mia arrived, letting herself in with the soft knock she always used. She took one look at her father's face and frowned. "Rough morning." "You could say that," he muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. From the hallway came the sound of Linda's sharp voice and Tyler's smug laughter. Mia's eyes narrowed. "They're getting bold." Frank didn't answer. Mia stepped closer, lowering her voice. Dad, I'm going to say this again, and I need you to take it seriously this time. Lock your documents, your deeds, bank folders, everything. He exhaled heavily. You think she'd go that far? I think you're trying too hard to give her the benefit of the doubt, Mia replied gently. And I think she's counting on that. Frank wanted to dismiss it, wanted to believe Linda's mood was just frustration, not part of something larger. But the last 24 hours felt different, sharper, like tension stretched tight enough to snap. He felt the first real sting of doubt, not just about her words but her intentions. Still, old habits pulled him back from the edge. Marriage is complicated, he said quietly. We'll get through it. Mia didn't argue, but her silence said enough. She hugged him before leaving, promising to check in later. As the front door closed behind her, Linda reappeared in the hallway. Her face was perfectly calm now, too calm, like SH. E'd switch masks. I'm going out for a while, she said coldly. Where? Frank asked. Just errands, she replied, grabbing her purse. She stepped onto the porch, the screen door creaking behind her. But as it swung shut, Frank caught something, a muffled voice drifting from the walkway outside. Linda had lifted her phone to her ear. Yes, she whispered, he doesn't know anything. The door clicked, cutting off the rest. Frank froze, the words hitting him with a strange, chilling clarity. Something was happening behind the scenes, something he couldn't yet see. And for the first time, he wondered if Mia had been right all along. Frank hadn't planned on going back to the beach house so soon. He woke before dawn, restless, unsettled, the conversation he'd overheard. He doesn't know anything, looping in his mind like a warning. Linda had slipped out of the house early, leaving only a short note about errands. Something about her hurried handwriting made his stomach tighten. He tried sitting with a cup of coffee, tried reading the newspaper, tried convincing himself he was imagining things, but the unease wouldn't let up. It kept building, thick and insistent, until he finally grabbed his keys and walked out the door without even telling himself why. The drive down the quiet coastal highway felt heavier than usual. The marshes passed by in soft golden streaks, the road winding toward the one place that had always given him clarity. But today, even the familiar scenery didn't settle him. The closer he got to the house, the tighter the pressure grew in his chest. When he turned onto the narrow gravel driveway, he pressed the brake so abruptly the seat belt dug into his shoulder. There were cars, 5 of them, parked haphazardly across the property. An SUV half-blocked the walkway. A sedan sat crooked near the mailbox. 2 work vans idled near the porch. All unfamiliar, all out of place. Frank stepped out cautiously, heart pounding. The sound of drills and hammers spilled out through the open front door. He smelled sawdust, fresh paint, movement, activity. He felt dizzy. What the hell, he muttered, walking toward the porch. Inside, strangers moved through his home like they owned it. One man was tearing up carpet in the living room. Another was measuring the kitchen island. 2 women discussed wall colors while flipping through swatches that sat on his late wife's handmade dining table. The house looked as if someone had pressed fast forward on chaos. A man holding a clipboard spotted him and offered a bright, businesslike smile. Morning, you must be the owner. Frank stiffened. Yes, and you all need to tell me what's going on in my house. Oh, the man said, as if relieved. Good, wasn't sure if you dropped by. The buyers want to make sure the place is move-in ready before closing day. Frank's blood ran cold. I'm sorry, he said slowly. The what? Closing day, the man repeated, flipping to a page on his clipboard. Contract S already well in motion, just making sure the renovations match what the buyers requested. Frank stared at him, unable to form words. The clipboard, the strangers, the noise, the remodeling, none of it made sense. It felt like he'd stepped into someone else's life. I never listed this house, he said finally, voice low, steady in a way that frightened even him. And I sure as hell didn't authorize renovations. The agent blinked, confused. Well, the documents say. Let me see them. The man hesitated, then handed the folder over. Frank's eyes scanned the pages, searching for something, anything, that would explain what he was looking at. His name appeared in multiple places, neatly signed, but the signatures weren't his. Close, but not his. Imitations, copies. His body went cold from the inside out. He closed the folder carefully, almost gently, because if he didn't, his hands might shake. "Where did you get this?" he asked. "From your wife," the agent said cheerfully, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. "She coordinated everything, told us you wanted a quick sale." Frank felt the floor tilt beneath him. Oxygen seemed to thin in the air. He handed the folder back without a word and stepped outside to keep from exploding in front of the workers. On the porch, the sunlight felt harsh, unforgiving. He pulled out his phone and dialed Linda. It rang once, twice, straight to voicemail. He tried again, straight to voicemail. He tried a third time, same result. He sent a text, then another, no response. Inside the house, the drill screamed again. Wood snapped. People laughed lightly as they worked. They had no idea they were tearing apart something sacred, something stolen. Frank walked to the edge of the driveway, staring at the row of cars crowding his land. His land. The house he built with Caroline. The house Linda had openly resented. The house that Mia warned him to protect. He felt a deep, rising clarity. Cold, heavy, inevitable. Someone had sold his house. Not someone. Linda. He didn't know the details yet, not the when, not the how, not the full extent of what she'd done, but he knew the truth. Just from the handiwork, just from the signatures, just from the silence when he called her. She was behind this. And standing there in the heat, surrounded by strangers tearing apart the last thing he'd built with his own hands, Frank felt something shift inside him. Slow, deliberate, irreversible. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't an accident. This was betrayal. And it was only the beginning. Frank drove home fast enough that the wind roared through the cracked window, but not fast enough to outrun the shaking in his hands. The world felt off-kilter, unreal, like he was watching someone else's life unravel from a distance. Every mile between the beach house and his front door tightened the knot sitting under his ribs. When he pulled into the driveway, Linda's car was parked neatly in its usual spot, glimmering under the afternoon sun as if nothing in the world was wrong, as if she hadn't detonated everything he'd built. Frank slammed the truck door and strode toward the house, every step fueled by disbelief in something colder, something dangerously close to fury. Inside, he found her in the living room, casually scrolling on her phone, completely unbothered. She didn't flinch when he entered, didn't look guilty, didn't even pretend. "We need to talk," Frank said, voice low and tight. Linda finally looked up, her expression bored, almost annoyed. "About what?" He stared at her, stunned by the casualness of it. "Workers are at the beach house, renovating for a buyer I didn't approve, a buyer I didn't even know existed. You want to tell me what's going on?" Linda set her phone down slowly, crossed her legs, and folded her hands in her lap. Calm, perfectly calm. "I sold it," she said simply. "We needed the money." Frank felt the air leave his lungs. He actually stepped back. "You sold it?" "Yes," she said, her tone flat, unashamed. "The market's high. It was the right time." "That house wasn't yours to sell." "Oh, stop being dramatic." She brushed a strand of hair from her face. "We're married, Frank. The state recognizes joint property. My signature was enough." He blinked at her, speechless. She said it like it was a minor inconvenience, like she'd rearranged furniture without asking, not sold the only piece of his past he still clung to. Before he could respond, Tyler and Brooke wandered in from the hallway, drawn by the tension like flies to rotting fruit. "Oh, we were wondering when you'd find out," Tyler said, smirking. "Mom made the right call. That place is old, falling apart. Better to cash out while it's worth something. Brooke nodded, arms folded, lips curved in satisfaction. Yeah, Frank, let it go already. It's not healthy being that attached to a building. Frank shot her a look that silenced her instantly. That building is my late wife's home, the one I built with my own hands, and none of you had the right to touch it. Linda's eyes hardened. Your late wife is gone, Frank. I'm your wife now, and we needed stability. We needed to think about my retirement, my kids' future. You weren't doing that. My daughter warned me, he muttered bitterly. She told me to protect my documents. I should have listened. Linda rolled her eyes. Please. Mia doesn't understand responsibility. She's emotional. She doesn't get how families work. Frank stepped closer, jaw tight. Where are the papers? What papers? The sale document, the contract, the signatures, all of it. Linda sighed, stood, and walked toward the kitchen drawer, his drawer, the one where he kept warranties, receipts, and things that mattered. She reached in without hesitation and pulled out a thick folder. She handed it to him like it meant nothing. Frank opened it. The pages were crisp, clean, official, and there in blue ink was his name, signed neatly, perfectly. But not by him. His heart hammered against his ribs. This isn't my signature, he said quietly. Linda shrugged, close enough. You forged my name. You would have said yes eventually, she said, her tone dismissive, almost irritated that he wasn't seeing it her way. I just made the decision before you dragged it out and overthought everything like you always do. He stared at her, unable to recognize the woman standing in front of him, unable to reconcile the betrayal with the person he'd let into his home, his life, his trust. This is fraud, Frank whispered. This is a felony. Oh, you're overreacting, Linda snapped. I did what was best for all of us. Stop making this dramatic, it's just property. Not to me, Frank said. His voice cracked, quiet, raw, controlled only by force. That house is the last piece of the life I had before everything fell apart. And you, his throat tightened. You stole it. Tyler scoffed. Come on, man, don't guilt-trip her. She did what she had to do. Brooke nodded beside him, smug and sile. And T now, eyes glinting with something that made Frank's stomach twist. Linda folded her arms, defensive and defiant. You should be thanking me. Frank closed the folder slowly, fingers trembling, not from rage, but from the weight of something far heavier. This betrayal wasn't just financial, wasn't just legal. It cut deeper than any wound since the day he lost Caroline. And as he stood there in the doorway of the home he once believed was safe, everything inside him shifted. This wasn't a marriage anymore. It was a battle he never saw coming. And Linda had already drawn first blood. Frank barely slept the night after discovering the forged papers. He sat at the kitchen table until dawn, staring at the folder of documents Linda had used to betray him. Every signature, every date, every lie. His house, the one he built with his own hands, was already halfway torn apart by strangers while the woman he married slept peacefully down the hall. But nothing prepared him for what waited the next morning. Linda stood in the living room with Tyler and Brooke flanking her like guards. A stack of folders lay on the coffee table, along with a thick envelope sealed with a red tab. When Frank walked in, they all turned toward him with the same expression: certainty, ownership, triumph. I was hoping you'd be awake, Linda said, voice sickeningly calm. We need to go over something important. Frank didn't sit. If this is about the beach house. It's not, she cut in sharply. It's about this house. He frowned. What about it? Linda lifted the sealed envelope and held it between two fingers. I sold it. The room fell silent. Frank's vision blurred for a moment like he'd been hit. What did you say? I sold the main house, she repeated, enunciating each word like she was speaking to a child. The paperwork is finalized. The buyers want us out within 30 days. He stared at her, unable to fully process the words. You sold my home without me. Our home, she corrected, shrugging lightly. And yes, I told you we needed the money. Tyler smirked. Brooke folded her arms, already surveying the walls as though imagining new decor. This place will be perfect for us one day, Tyler said casually. Mom made the smart call. Brooke nodded with a grin. Yeah, feels good knowing this won't go to waste. Frank's stomach twisted. Your mother doesn't own this house. She can't sell what isn't hers. Linda raised her chin. Actually, I can. And I did. I spoke with a family attorney who explained everything. Given your recent behavior, she let her eyes drift pointedly across his face. There are concerns about your emotional stability. Concerns that make it unsafe for you to manage property alone. Frank blinked in disbelief. Emotional instability, because I was upset you committed fraud. Because you've been volatile, she answered smoothly. I've felt unsafe. My children have felt unsafe, and I had to take control before things got worse. Tyler nodded solemnly, playing the role. Yeah, man, you've been off. Brooke added, it's honestly been scary sometimes. Frank almost laughed, but the humiliation was too sharp to breathe through. You three are unbelievable. Linda didn't flinch. The point is the house is sold. We have 30 days to vacate. I've already spoken with movers. You should start packing your things. His things. That's how she phrased it. Like the life he built here had been reduced to items she would allow him to box up and remove. Frank felt his throat tighten, not with tears but with a cold, razor-edged clarity. He'd built this home after Caroline died. Every room carried pieces of a life he had clawed his way through grief to recreate, and Linda had gutted it with a signature she forged in his name. His voice came out flat. I'm not going anywhere. Oh, Frank, she sighed, don't make this ugly. You've done enough. As if he were the one destroying their life. Just then the front door swung open. Mia stepped in, freezing mid-step at the sight of packed boxes, folders, and the three faces glaring at her father. What's going on? She demanded. Linda answered first. We're selling the house. Frank has 30 days. Mia looked at her father, then at the others, and something in her expression hardened instantly. She walked straight to Linda. You can't sell what doesn't belong to you, she said sharply. And if you forged anything else, anything, Dad and I will call the police right now. Tyler stepped forward defensively. Back off, Mia. This doesn't concern you. It concerns me more than it concerns you, she shot back. You don't get to steal my father's life. Linda lifted her chin. I made the decision for the good of the family. What family? Mia snapped, eyes burning. The one you're trying to rip apart. For the first time, Linda's calm expression faltered. Frank watched the exchange quietly, humiliation burning beneath his skin. The betrayal wasn't just an injury, it was a complete ping of dignity. But within that humiliation something else began forming, something steady, something cold. He wasn't going to cry, he wasn't going to yell, he wasn't going to plead. No. He was going to end this. All of it. That night, after the shouting and threats and stunned silence faded, Frank sat alone in the dark at the edge of the bed he no longer recognized as his. In the hall, he heard Linda moving around, confident, satisfied, victorious. He looked at the shadows on the wall, breathing slowly. Let her sleep, he thought. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow, he would take everything back. And by the time he was done, Linda wouldn't control a single piece of his life ever again. Frank was out of the house before sunrise, long before Linda or her children stirred. The air was cool, sharp, carrying the briny smell of the coast as he drove toward the only person he trusted with something this explosive. His hands tightened on the steering wheel, but his mind was strangely calm, like the shock had settled into something colder, cleaner. Victor Kane's office sat above an old hardware store, just as it had for the past 20 years. No fancy sign, no polished waiting room, just a narrow staircase and a door with peeling paint. But Frank had never needed decorations. He needed a man who didn't flinch when the world turned ugly. Victor was already inside, sipping black coffee, glasses perched low on his nose. He looked up when Frank walked in and took one long look at his face. "What happened?" he asked quietly. Frank sat down, the words came out rough. "Linda sold my beach house without my permission, and she forged my signature." He paused, jaw clenching. "She sold the main house too." Victor didn't react with shock. He reacted with stillness, the kind that meant danger. He leaned back, interlaced his fingers, and said, "Start from the beginning." Frank laid it all out. The renovations, the forged documents, the smugness in Linda's children, and her cold admission that she'd taken control of everything. When he finished, Victor let out a slow exhale, rubbing his chin. "All right," he said. "Here's the truth, Frank. What she did wasn't just unethical, it was criminal, fraud, forgery, unauthorized conveyance of property. Every one of those is chargeable." Frank swallowed hard. "But we've been married for years. Doesn't that complicate things? Doesn't that give her leverage?" Victor shook his head. "Only if you let it." Then more firmly, "You have more power than you think." Frank looked at him, searching for something solid to hold on to. "It feels like she owns everything right now, like she's already decided the outcome." "That's because you haven't decided yours yet," Victor replied. "Linda is counting on you to be passive, to avoid confrontation, to roll over because you're embarrassed. She's banking on you being the man you were before today." Frank felt the weight of that because it was true. He'd avoided conflict for years, thinking peace was something you earned by bending. But Linda hadn't wanted peace. She'd wanted access. Victor slid a legal pad toward him. "What I need is every document connected to your assets, deeds, prenup copies, insurance forms, anything Mia saved over the years." Frank nodded and pulled out a worn folder from his jacket, one Mia had insisted he put together long before any of this chaos began. "My daughter kept backups of everything," he said. "She said one day I'd be glad she did." Victor's smile was small, approving. "Smart girl." Frank handed him the documents and the lawyer flipped through them quickly, eyes sharp behind his glasses. "Good, very good. These papers alone prove she had no authority to sell either property without your written consent, and since the signatures were forged, the sales won't stand. But we're not just undoing the damage." He tapped the folder. "We're building a countermove." Frank felt something flicker in his chest. Not anger, not grief, but something steadier. Purpose. "What kind of countermove?" he asked. "The quiet kind," Victor said. "The legal kind. The kind that doesn't announce itself until it's too late for them to react." He leaned forward. "We're going to freeze every sale, reverse every transfer, and document every illegal action she took. When this is over, the law will be so firmly on your side she won't have a single place left to stand." Frank closed his eyes for a moment, letting that sink in. For the first time in months, maybe years, he felt a shift inside himself, a recentering, a reclaiming of something he'd forgotten he had. Control. Victor placed a hand on the folder. "Frank, you're not a victim unless you choose to be, and from where I'm sitting, you're finally waking up." Frank opened his eyes slowly. The humiliation from the night before hadn't disappeared, but it no longer owned him. It had transformed into something sharper, more deliberate. "I'm ready," he said quietly. Victor nodded. "Then let's begin." Together, they worked through the morning, drafting filings, documenting fraud, preparing the first wave of legal reversals. Each page they completed felt like a board Frank was nailing back into place, rebuilding something Linda had tried to dismantle. By the time he stepped out of Victor's office, the sun had risen fully, casting warm light across the street. Frank inhaled deeply, feeling the tension lift from his shoulders, replaced by a steady resolve. He wasn't done hurting. But he wasn't helpless anymore. For the first time since the nightmare began, he felt the spark of control return, quiet but burning, ready to spread. And Linda had no idea it was coming. Frank pulled into the driveway just after noon, the engine rumbling to a stop. He sat for a moment, letting his face settle into the expression he needed, slumped shoulders, tired eyes, the defeated man Linda expected him to be. The man she counted on him never to outgrow. He inhaled deeply, smoothed the edge of his jacket where Victor's documents were tucked safely inside, and walked toward the house with a slow, measured step. Inside, the atmosphere buzzed with celebration, their celebration. Linda stood in the kitchen with a mug of coffee, talking animatedly on speakerphone about liquidating assets and fresh starts. When she saw Frank, she gave him a triumphant smile, the kind that didn't bother hiding its cruelty. "Well," she said, "you're home. I was starting to think you'd run off to sulk somewhere." She sipped her coffee with exaggerated grace. "It's for the best, Frank. Once the sale money hits, we'll be in a better position than we've ever been. I've been looking at condos closer to Tyler's place, something modern, maintenance-free, something suited for new beginnings." Frank nodded, keeping his gaze low. "If that's what you want." Linda raised an eyebrow. "It's what we want." But her emphasis didn't land. She didn't notice, or didn't care, that Frank's agreement lacked conviction. She was already swept up in the future she believed she owned. From the hallway came the sound of boxes dragging and muffled laughter. Tyler emerged carrying framed art that had hung in the foyer for years, art Linda once claimed she didn't even like. Brooke followed behind him with a stack of towels and blankets. "We're organizing what needs to move," Tyler announced proudly. "Figured we'd get a head start since everything's going to be different soon." Brooke added, "We're donating some of the old stuff. Mom said it's time for a clean slate." Frank quietly watched them pillage through his belongings, touching things that weren't theirs, stacking memories as though they held no value. The anger simmered low in his chest, but he let it stay quiet. He needed them blind. He needed them arrogant. While Tyler and Brooke moved through the rooms, Frank wandered behind them unnoticed, slipping small but critical items into his pocket. Spare keys to the beach house, the original deed Mia had tucked away in his office, photos that proved ownership timelines, and bank statements Linda never bothered checking because she thought she already controlled everything. Linda was too busy outlining her plans to pay attention. "I've been talking with a broker," she continued, flipping through a glossy catalog on the counter. "He's estimating we could get a six-figure return if we move quickly, and once the documents finalize, we can negotiate the next place. Something with an open floor plan and big windows. I want light, Frank. I want a life that reflects who I am." Frank kept his voice flat. "You deserve that." She smiled, genuine, satisfied, utterly convinced she had broken him. "I know." As afternoon slid toward evening, Mia arrived through the back door, tension hidden beneath a careful mask. She glanced at Frank, reading him instantly, then shifted her expression to match the act. "So," Mia said loudly enough for Linda to hear, "Dad told me the news. I guess it's time for us to start packing too." Linda beamed. "See, even Mia understands. Change is hard, but sometimes it's necessary." Mia didn't reply, but she moved through the kitchen with a rehearsed air of resignation, stacking trivial items into a small box, the perfect disguise. Every so often, her eyes met Frank's for a fraction of a second, exchanging silent understanding. Keep the mask on. Keep them blind. By nightfall, Tyler and Brooke had left, promising to return early the next morning to help move the big stuff. Linda poured herself a glass of wine, humming lightly as she walked upstairs. She paused midway, turning back to Frank. "You'll sleep better once everything is final," she said. "You'll see, this is the right path." Frank forced a weary nod. "If you say so." Satisfied, Linda disappeared into the bedroom and shut the door. Lights clicked off one by one. The house went quiet, too quiet. Mia stepped beside Frank in the dim hallway. "Are you okay?" Frank exhaled slowly, letting the mask fall for the first tea. "Ame that day. I'm more than okay," he whispered. "Tomorrow everything changes." And in the stillness of that dark house, his house, Frank felt the storm he'd been holding finally steady itself. Not in rage, not in grief, but in resolve. Frank was in Victor's office before the sun had even burned through the morning haze. The old building smelled faintly of dust and coffee, but today it carried something else: momentum, a silent current of purpose. Victor already had his sleeves rolled up, phone in hand, files spread across the desk like a battlefield map. "Ready?" Victor asked. Frank nodded. "Do it." Victor dialed immediately, placing the call on speaker. It rang once before a crisp, professional voice answered, one of the attorneys representing the supposed buyers of the beach house. Victor introduced himself, then said the words that stopped the conversation cold. "We are filing an immediate fraud alert. The seller's husband never signed any transfer documents. The signatures are forged." Silence, then a stiff reply: "Forged, our office was told." "By someone with no legal authority," Victor cut in. "And if your clients proceed, they'll be knowingly participating in the sale of stolen property." That did it. Within minutes, the tone shifted from confident to cautious to fully cooperative. The opposing attorney wanted copies of everything. Victor already had them scanned and ready. Frank watched, barely breathing, as Victor sent document after document: proof of ownership, proof of signature discrepancies, and most importantly, the prenup Linda had forgotten still held power. When the call ended, Victor turned to him. "That stops the sale in its tracks. Now we file your complaint." Frank's hands were steady as he signed the official statement. It felt surreal, signing his real name to undo the fake ones Linda had written in his place. The complaint included a sworn declaration that he had never consented to any sale, had never authorized Linda to sign on his behalf, and had never agreed to renovations, transfer, or negotiation of the property. Victor stapled the pages together. Next step: handwriting analysis, the fastest route to destroying her position. Within the hour, a forensic document specialist arrived. Gray hair, sharp eyes, fingers steady as a surgeon's. She sat across from Frank with the forged documents laid neatly beside several genuine samples of his signature. She didn't need long. "These are not the same writer," she said with crisp certainty. "Strokes, pressure, spacing, it's all inconsistent. Your signature has a natural taper on the downstroke. The forged one doesn't. And the person who wrote this," she tapped the fraudulent signature, hesitated. "You don't hesitate." Frank absorbed that. Someone had slowly, carefully tried to become him on paper, only to fail. Victor retrieved the final written analysis. "This," he said, tapping the report, "is the nail in the coffin." The legal wheels moved faster than Frank expected, faster than Linda could have imagined. By early afternoon, the beach house sale was reversed, fully, officially, irrevocably. The buyers withdrew. The contract collapsed. Every fraudulent document was nullified. And in its place, updated paperwork now listed Frank Wallace as the sole, uncontested owner of the beach house. No joint control, no shared authority, no loopholes for Linda to slither through. Frank stared at the new deed for several seconds, feeling something settle inside his chest, something firm and deeply rooted. He hadn't just reclaimed a house. He de-reclaimed the last piece of his life Linda had tried to steal. Victor handed him the envelope. "Take this home, and don't tell her a thing." Frank left the office with the documents tucked safely beneath his jacket. He didn't drive home immediately. Instead, he stopped by a hardware store on a quiet corner of town, the kind where older clerks didn't ask questions and didn't need explanations. He bought new locks, new deadbolts, fresh keys, enough to secure both the beach house and the main house, enough to erase every trace of access Linda believed she had. By mid-afternoon, he was back at the beach house, walking through the silent rooms, installing each lock with deliberate, careful turns of the screwdriver. It felt symbolic, like he was sealing off not just a door but a chapter, a boundary, a violation that would never happen again. Then he drove home and changed the locks there as well. Quiet, efficient, unnoticed. When he re-entered the house, the evening sunlight spilled across the carpet in soft gold. Upstairs, he heard the faint hum of Linda's voice drifting from the bedroom. She was talking to someone on the phone, her tone light, relaxed, victorious. She had no idea everything she thought she controlled had crumbled hours earlier. No idea the sale was gone. No idea her access was gone. No idea her power was gone. Frank stood at the bottom of the stairs, listening to her laugh softly about big plans and smart moves, her confidence floating through the house like a lie dressed in silk. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. Because tonight, Linda slept peacefully. Unaware she now owned nothing. Unaware the storm she created was about to turn directly back toward her. Linda woke to sunlight spilling across the bedroom wall, warm and soft, the kind of morning that whispered comfort. She stretched lazily, smiling to herself. In 30 days, she'd be living in a brand new condo. No creaky steps, no old paint, no memories she didn't choose. Everything was finally moving in the direction she wanted. She reached for her phone. No text from Frank, typical. He was probably sulking in the kitchen. But as she stepped out of the room, something felt off. The house was too quiet. No footsteps, no coffee brewing, no sound of drawers opening or papers shuffling. She called out, "Frank," no response. She tried again, louder, still nothing. Annoyed, she headed downstairs. The first real jolt hit when she opened the front door to get the mail, except the moment she stepped outside, the door clicked shut behind her. When she tried to re-enter, her key jammed. She twisted harder, rattled it, tried the spare. None worked. A cold ripple spread through her chest. What the hell? She tried again, forcing the key until it scraped painfully against the metal, but the lock didn't budge. It wasn't broken. It had been changed. Before she could process the meaning of that, Tyler's car screeched into the driveway. He jumped out, Brooke right behind him, both carrying boxes and looking irritated. "Mom, why aren't you inside? I thought we were moving stuff today." "The keys aren't working," Linda snapped. "He must have jammed the lock or—" Tyler shoved past her and tried his own key. Nothing. Brooke tried the back door, same result. "What is going on?" Brooke hissed, rattling the handle until her palm turned red. "Why won't it open?" "Because the locks were changed," Linda said, breath quickening. "Frank must be having another episode. He thinks he can." Tyler didn't wait for the explanation. He stepped back and kicked the door hard. The frame shuddered. He kicked again, then again, louder each time. "Tyler," Linda hissed, "stop." "I'm getting inside my own house," Tyler yelled. "It's not." But before she could finish, a sheriff's cruiser rolled up the driveway. Sheriff Dean Harper stepped out, hat low, expression unreadable. His presence alone was enough to freeze Tyler mid-kick. "Morning," Harper said calmly. "Got a call about attempted forced entry." Linda's heart stuttered. "Forced entry? Sheriff, this is our house." Harper looked at her, then at the locked door. "Not according to the paperwork I was sent." The front door opened quietly. Frank stepped out. He looked rested, steady, entirely unshaken by the chaos erupting on his lawn. Beside him, Mia stood with her arms folded, gaze sharp as glass. Linda's breath caught. "Frank, what did you do?" Frank didn't answer her. Instead, he handed a folder to Sheriff Harper. Inside were the legal orders Victor had prepared, documents reversing the fraudulent beach house sale, affirming Frank as the sole owner of both properties, and declaring Linda, Tyler and Brooke as individuals with no legal claim to the home. Harper flipped through the pages, nodding once. Everything here checks out. Tyler stepped forward angrily. We live here, he can't just. Harper held up a hand. If you don't live here legally, then forcing your way in is trespassing, and I don't think you want that charge on your record. Brooke's face crumpled in disbelief. But Mom said we were moving in. Frank finally spoke, voice calm and low. Your mother said a lot of things. Linda felt her throat tighten as she lunged forward. This is ridiculous. The beach house sale was undone, Frank finished. Legally reversed. Every signature traced back to fraud, every document void. Linda's voice cracked. No, that can't be true. I handled everything. Exactly, Frank replied, his gaze steady. And that's why it fell apart. Her breath grew shallow, her fingers trembled. For the first time she looked small, panic creeping across her face in waves. Frank, listen, we can talk about this. We can fix. There's nothing to fix, he said softly. You made your choices. Tyler stepped toward Frank, red-faced and shaking. You can't just throw us out of our own. Harper cut him off firmly. One more step and I cuff you. Trespassing is a crime, son. Don't make me prove it. Brooke started crying, whispering to her mother, What do we do? Mom, what do we do? Linda stared at the locked door, realization dawning with bone-deep horror. She had lost everything. Every plan. Every illusion of control. Every lie. Frank didn't gloat. He didn't shout. He didn't even smile. He simply stood there with the quiet strength of a man reclaiming what was his. Mia stepped closer to her father. Dad. Frank exhaled slowly, eyes still on Linda as she unraveled in front of him. Now, he said softly, the real eviction begins. The morning after the confrontation felt unnervingly quiet, like the house itself was holding its breath. Frank stood at the kitchen counter, a stack of freshly stamped documents resting beneath his hand. They were crisp, official, heavy in a way that went beyond paper. Today was not about reclaiming property. Today was about removing invaders. Mia stood beside him, steady and silent. Are you ready? She asked. Frank nodded once. I'm done letting them write the rules. At precisely 9 o'clock, a knock sounded at the front door, 3 firm taps that echoed through the house. Sheriff Harper stepped in, stoic as ever, nodding politely to Frank before positioning himself near the entryway. Behind him came the courier carrying the legal envelopes, 3 of them. Footsteps thundered upstairs, then down. Linda appeared first, wrapped in a robe, eyes red from either crying or screaming, Frank couldn't tell. Tyler followed, shoulders squared with artificial bravado. Brooke trailed last, arms wrapped around herself, already trembling. What now? Tyler barked. Another lecture, another stunt. Frank said nothing. He picked up the 3 envelopes and approached them one by one. This, he said, handing the first to Linda, is your eviction notice. He handed the second to Tyler. The third to Brooke. Tyler ripped his open immediately. Brooke just stared at hers like it might bite. Linda hesitated, then tore into the envelope with shaking fingers. The moment her eyes reached the first line, her face drained of color. This is illegal, she shouted. You can't evict me, I'm your wife. Frank met her gaze calmly. Yes, and here's what you forgot, Linda. He walked to the coffee table, grabbed a folder Victor had prepared and opened it. The prenup. The one you insisted on signing to protect yourself when we got married. Her lips parted, she blinked rapidly. Frank, that was years ago, we never talked. You didn't talk about it, he said, but you signed it, and the terms were clear. No shared assets, no marital claim to property, and no rights to any home I owned prior to our marriage. Tyler stepped forward. Hold on, so you're saying she gets nothing? Frank's eyes sharpened. Legally, yes. Linda looked like the ground had opened beneath her. Frank, please. You can't evict your own family. Frank lifted the eviction notice. Legally, you aren't my family in the eyes of this house, and after what you did, you're not my family in any other sense either. Tyler sneered, trying to salvage control. Fine, then I'll sue you for emotional damages, for breaking promises, for... He didn't finish, because Victor Kane walked through the door at that exact moment, folder under his arm, expression collected and lethal. You might want to rethink that lawsuit, Victor said. I have documentation showing your participation in the fraudulent sale attempts, phone logs, emails, contractor correspondence, even messages coordinating renovations. Tyler's mouth opened, closed, then opened again. That's no, you can't have. Victor raised an eyebrow. Would you like me to read them aloud, or forward them directly to the district attorney? Tyler stepped back like he'd been struck. Brooke, meanwhile, had sunk onto the sofa, clutching the eviction notice with both hands. Tears slid down her face, quiet, exhausted. Mom, she whispered, voice cracking. You told us everything was fine. You said we were getting a new life. You said Frank wouldn't fight back. Kay. Linda turned toward her daughter, reaching out. Brooke, I did this for us, for security, for our future. Brooke pulled away, shaking harder. You ruined us. You ruined everything. Frank didn't react outwardly, but inside, he felt a somber recognition. Betrayal always costs more than the betrayer expects. Sheriff Harper stepped forward, clearing his throat. As of this morning, these eviction orders are active. You have 48 hours to vacate the premises. If you refuse, I will enforce the removal myself under the authority of the county. Linda gasped like she'd been stabbed. 48 hours, that's impossible. Where are we supposed to go? Anywhere else, Harper answered simply. Tyler muttered something under his breath, pacing like a cornered animal. Brooke kept crying softly, staring down at the papers like they might start bleeding. Linda turned back to Frank, desperation fully eclipsing her pride. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. Frank, please, don't do this. I made mistakes, yes, but we can fix them. We can talk this through. We can be us again. Frank held her gaze steadily. No anger now, no shaking, just truth. You already did this, he said quietly, long before today. Her face crumpled in on itself. She staggered back, unable to find words. Frank stepped beside Mia, who touched his arm gently. The house was silent except for Brooke's sobs and Tyler's restless pacing. Even Sheriff Harper seemed to respect the gravity of the moment. Mia whispered, Dad, you okay? Frank exhaled slowly, deep, solid, resolute. Yes, he said, for the first time in a long time. And as Linda stared at the eviction notice trembling in her hand, Frank knew. This was not revenge. This was justice. And he was only halfway through delivering it. By late morning, the street outside Frank's home looked like a scene from a slow-motion disaster. Word had spread, neighbors stepping onto porches, crossing arms, whispering behind coffee mugs, as Sheriff Harper's deputies moved furniture, boxes, and bags onto the lawn. The soft thud of each item hitting the grass echoed through the neighborhood like a series of quiet verdicts. Linda's family had gathered near the curb, stumbling into the chaos with a mixture of disbelief and outrage. Her sister arrived first, clutching a purse to her chest, eyes wide as she took in the spectacle. Then cousins, nephews, and an uncle drifted in, murmuring among themselves. They formed a loose semicircle around Linda, who stood trembling near a stack of boxes that held everything she thought she controlled. This is insane, absolutely insane, Linda muttered, pacing in frantic circles. He can't do this, he can't. But her voice cracked each time, betraying the truth even she was starting to accept. Across the lawn, neighbors whispered behind half-raised hands. The older couple from across the street stood together, murmuring about how they'd seen this coming. A jogger slowed to a walk, pretending to stretch just to watch. Someone even pulled out a phone, though Sheriff Harper quickly shut that down with a single pointed look. Tyler stormed down the walkway carrying a backpack and 2 duffel bags, dropping them onto the lawn with a dramatic grunt. "This is a joke, a setup. He can't evict us, somebody tell him." He turned to the neighbors, arms outstretched as if expecting applause or sympathy. "Come on," he shouted. "You all know Frank's unstable. He's been losing it for months. This is elder abuse or something." The neighbors exchanged glances, but none stepped forward. None volunteered support. The weight of the legal documents, the presence of the sheriff, the clarity of the situation, it was all too solid, too undeniable. A teenage neighbor muttered under his breath, "Dude, if the sheriff's here, you lost." His mother quickly hushed him, but the statement hung in the air like a bell toll. Tyler looked around, incredulous. "Are you kidding me? No one's going to say anything." But the silence answered for them. Brooke sat on the grass beside a pile of kitchen utensils, shoulders shaking, face buried in her hands. Mom, what do we do? Where are we supposed to go?" Linda dropped beside her daughter, grabbing her hands and rocking back and forth. "It's not our fault, baby. None of this is our fault. Frank is doing this out of spite. He's doing this to punish us, to punish me." She looked around wildly, searching for someone to validate her, but no eyes met hers for more than a second. "This is all happening because everyone turned against me," Linda cried. "The lawyers, the sheriff, the stupid system, Frank's daughter, everyone. No one ever supported me. No one." Her sister tried to comfort her, but Linda jerked away, insisting she was the victim of a conspiracy she couldn't describe. Meanwhile, on the porch, Frank stood silently beside Sheriff Harper. The deputy handed him a clipboard with the final eviction documents. Frank took the pen without hesitate, ironed and signed his name cleanly, smoothly, without the tremor of uncertainty that had once governed him. Harper nodded with approval. "That's everything. They're officially out." Frank thanked him quietly. He didn't gloat, didn't smirk, didn't revel in the scene unfolding below. His calm wasn't cold, it was resolute. This wasn't revenge for sport, it was necessary correction. Mia stepped closer, slipping her hand around his arm. "Dad," she whispered, "I'm proud of you." Frank exhaled slowly, the tension leaving his shoulders inch by inch. "I didn't think I'd ever be capable of something like this." "It's not cruelty," Mia said. "It's protecting yourself. You should have never had to learn this the hard way, but you did." He looked out over the yard one more time. Tyler still pacing, cursing under his breath. Brooke crying softly into her sweater sleeves. Linda shaking, blaming ghosts and shadows for mistakes that had always come from her own hand. The wind lifted the edge of a cardboard box, revealing a pile of items Linda once claimed were her new life essentials. They sat now as discarded symbols of a future she had built on deceit. Frank felt no triumph, only clarity. This moment was not the end of the war. It wasn't even justice fulfilled. It was merely the fallout from Linda's first collapse, a necessary consequence, a public unraveling. And he knew, deep down, that the real reckoning was still ahead. He tightened his arm gently around Mia's hand. "This," he murmured almost to himself, "is only the midpoint." Mia nodded, eyes steady. "Then we handle the rest together." Frank looked out at the scene before him, calm and unwavering. Today, the collapse had begun. But the true conclusion, his full restoration, still waited beyond the horizon. Linda's new life didn't begin with the dignity she once imagined. No bright, modern condo with polished countertops, no curated lifestyle to parade on social media. Instead, she ended up in a cramped, aging rental on the edge of town, where the walls were thin enough to hear the neighbors arguing and the air conditioner rattled like loose coins in a jar. Tyler hauled his mattress down the narrow hallway, muttering curses under his breath with every step. Brooke dragged grocery bags inside, her movements sluggish, defeated. None of them spoke much. The bright future Linda had promised them had shriveled into bare light bulbs, peeling paint, and a rent payment they could barely afford between the three of them. Linda stood in the middle of the tiny living room, arms crossed, jaw tight. "This is temporary," she said, though no one had asked. "Frank blindsided us. Once people hear what he did, what he's really like, they'll take our side. We'll get back on our feet." But even her own children didn't look convinced. Word traveled fast in a small coastal town. Frank heard the first whisper at the grocery store, of all places, a woman from the neighborhood stopping him near the canned goods section, voice lowered conspiratorially. "I'm so sorry about everything you're going through," she said. "I heard Linda's been telling folks, well, that you mistreated her, that she left for her own safety." Frank blinked, stunned for a moment. "She said what?" The woman flushed. "I knew it didn't sound right. Everyone knows you, but I thought you should know what's being said." Frank thanked her and left quickly, feeling something heavy lodge in his chest. He sat in his truck for a long minute, gripping the steering wheel, trying to calm the pulse hammering beneath his skin. Of course, Linda hadn't accepted responsibility. Of course, she had rewritten herself as the victim. Of course, she had twisted the story into something that kept her pride intact. When Frank reached Victor's office later that afternoon, he slammed the door a little harder than intended. "She's spreading lies now," Frank said before even sitting, "saying I abused her, that she was forced out, that." Victor held up a hand, calm as ever. "I already heard." Frank stared. "Already?" "5 calls in 2 hours, Victor said. "People asking if the rumors are true. I told them exactly what needed telling." Frank's breath steadied, if only slightly. "So what do I do?" "Nothing," Victor said simply. "Let her talk. The truth is already unraveling her story. Lies don't hold shape when the facts are public record." He leaned forward. "You've got legal proof of everything she did. Forgery, fraud, illegal sale attempts. No one with sense will believe her. The more she talks, the more desperate she looks." Frank swallowed, but it still stings. Victor nodded knowingly. "Betrayal always does, but don't let noise pull you off the path you're on." Later that evening, Mia met him at the driveway, a soft breeze pushing loose strands of hair across her face. She watched him with quiet concern. "You heard too?" Frank asked. Mia nodded. "People are calling me too, but Dad, you don't have to defend yourself to anyone, the people who matter. Already know the truth." She touched his arm gently. "Don't let her pull you back into her mess. Leave her lies with her." Her voice soothed a part of him still raw from everything that had happened. For years, he'd carried guilt. Guilt for moving on after Caroline. Guilt for wanting companionship again. Guilt for believing Linda's judgment over his own instincts. But now, standing on his own property, he felt that weight finally start to shift. "Come on," Mia said softly. "Let's go to the beach house." Frank hesitated. He hadn't returned since the chaos began, but something inside him nudged forward, a pull toward the one place that had never lied to him. They drove together, silent but connected. When they arrived, the beach house stood tall against the fading light, weathered but strong. Frank stepped inside, the familiar creak of the floorboards greeting him like an old friend. He walked slowly through each room, fingertips grazing surfaces he once crafted with his own hands. The walls still held the memories, Caroline's laughter echoing in the corners, the scent of old summers, the imprint of a life built with love rather than manipulation. There was pain here, yes, deep, lingering, real, but mixed with it was something else, healing. A slow, unexpected warmth spreading through the cracks Linda had tried to deepen. Mia followed him quietly. "It's still yours, Dad, every piece of it." Frank nodded, taking a long breath. I think I want to fix it up. Not for anyone else, not for a sale, just for me, for us." A small smile tugged at Mia's lips. "Then let's do it." Frank turned toward the window, watching the waves roll in, steady and sure. He felt something finally anchor inside him. Linda had taken her shot. She had tried to hollow him out. But this house, the house he built with love, would be the place he rebuilt himself. And for the first time in a long while, Frank felt ready to begin. The first strike came on a Thursday morning, delivered in a stiff white envelope slid under Frank's door. He found it on his way out, the bold legal print staring up at him like a dare. He opened it slowly, already sensing the desperation behind it. Inside was a formal claim filed by Tyler Wallace, alleging that Frank had promised him and Brooke inheritance rights to both houses. The document was layered with vague accusations, verbal assurances, long-term intentions, implied commitments, a messy collection of half-phrases meant to sound legitimate. Frank let out a breath somewhere between disbelief and weary amusement. Tyler's signature sat at the bottom in oversized, confident strokes, as if the size of his name could compensate for the hollowness of the claim. Frank drove straight to Victor's office. Victor skimmed the document once, then again slowly, lips twitching with something that wasn't quite a smile. "This," he said, flipping the last page closed, "is going to be embarrassingly easy." Frank sat down, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "He really thinks this will work." "He doesn't think," Victor corrected. "He panics. There's a difference." He tapped the papers. "There is zero legal standing here, not 1 inch of footing. No written agreement, no witnesses, no proof, and no right to inherit property from a step-parent, especially in a prenup-protected situation." "Can we counter it?" "We don't need to. We just dissolve it." Victor stamped the rejection papers with clean, confident motions. "This claim won't last the afternoon." Frank felt tension unravel in his chest, a small, steadying thing. For once, Linda's children weren't dictating the terms. They weren't manipulating the narrative. They were scrambling while he stood on solid ground. Victor handed the rejected claim back. "Tyler's running out of moves. Expect noise, not results." Noise came sooner than expected. That evening, Frank returned to the beach house and found Brooke sitting on the front steps, shoulders curled inward, eyes red from crying. She stood quickly when she saw him. "Frank," she said, voice trembling, I need to talk to you, please." Frank paused, keeping distance. "Your brother send you." "No," she shook her head quickly. "Tyler doesn't know I'm here. I don't know what else to do." Her desperation wasn't theatrical. It wasn't sharp like Linda's or arrogant like Tyler's. It was soft, defeated, a young woman watching her world collapse without understanding how it happened. She stepped closer. "I have bills, Frank, rent, medical payments, debt. I depended on Mom and she depended on you. Now everything's gone and Tyler's losing his mind and her voice cracked. Can you help me, just until I get back on my feet?" Frank looked at her, the fragility in her posture, the fear in her eyes, and felt a twinge of old instinct. The part of him that wanted to fix things, to offer stability, to take responsibility even for wounds he didn't cause. But then he thought of forged signatures, illegal sales, eviction notices, lies whispered across town. He thought of every moment Linda and her children treated him like an obstacle to climb, rather than a man to respect. Gently but firmly, he shook his head. "Brooke, your mother made her choices, and you followed her lead." His voice remained calm but resolute. "It's not my job to pay for the consequences." Brooke's face crumpled. She covered her mouth, nodding slowly, as if she'd expected the answer but needed to hear it anyway. She whispered, "Okay," then walked down the steps and disappeared into the soft glow of evening, leaving Frank alone with the quiet crash of distant waves. As he stepped inside, his phone buzzed, once, twice, then again and again. Notifications stacked like warnings. Linda calling. Linda texting. Linda calling again. "Frank, we need to talk. This has gone too far. Please answer me. I know you're reading these." He placed the phone face down on the counter. Her calls weren't emergencies. They were last attempts at control, and he no longer lived inside the orbit of her chaos. For the first time in years, Frank felt the scales balance. Not in revenge, not in cruelty, but in equilibrium, something he hadn't felt since long before Linda entered his life. He walked through the beach house slowly, absorbing the soft groan of the floorboards, the whisper of the ocean through cracked windows, the lingering scent of old cedar. This place was both wound and salve, scar tissue and heartbeat. He could see what needed repairing. Loose trim, faded paint, boards lifting near the kitchen threshold. He touched the wall gently, as if greeting an old friend rediscovered. "Let's bring you back," he murmured. "Not for resale. Not for anyone's inheritance. Not to appease another person's agenda. But for himself." He gathered tools from the old workbench, sandpaper, a brush, a can of primer, and began with the first stroke along the wall. A small act, simple and quiet, but one that signaled a shift. He wasn't reacting anymore. He was rebuilding. And this time, no one was going to take anything from him again. The sun had barely begun its slow descent over the Carolina shoreline when Frank heard the sound of tires crunching against gravel. He set down his paintbrush, wiping his hands on an old rag as he stepped onto the porch of the beach house. The air smelled of salt and primer, clean, simple, honest. Everything Linda was not. A pale blue sedan rolled to a shaky stop beside the porch steps. The engine cut off, but Linda didn't move at first. She sat inside, hunched over, her silhouette trembling. When she finally opened the door, she stumbled out with tear-streaked cheeks and swollen eyes. "Frank," she said, voice cracking the moment she saw him. "Please, I need to talk to you." Frank stood at the top of the steps, posture steady, expression unreadable. "I'm listening." Linda climbed slowly, clutching the railing as though the house itself rejected her. When she reached the landing, she stared at the freshly painted trim, the repaired siding, the new locks. Her face twisted, something between longing and regret, but also a hint of the entitlement she couldn't fully hide. "I didn't know where else to go," she whispered. "Everything is falling apart, Frank. The kids are a mess. The rental is awful. People are talking behind my back. I just need you to understand why I did what I did." Frank remained silent, the ocean wind brushing past them in soft waves. Linda took a shaky breath. "Selling the house, selling them both, I did it for our future, for us, for stability. You've always struggled with letting go of the past, Frank. I was trying to help us move forward." He studied her, every word, every tremor, every manipulative cadence he now recognized too easily. "You sold my homes for our future," he repeated quietly. "Then why did you forge my signature?" Her face froze. The question landed with heavy, unforgiving weight. She blinked rapidly, looking down at her hands. "I didn't think you'd agree. You get emotional about things that don't matter anymore. I knew you'd make it dramatic. I didn't want to fight." "So you chose fraud instead," Frank said. Linda opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. "I was trying to protect us. Tyler and Brooke needed help, and you were always so distant when it came to taking care of them. You never embraced them as your own." "They were never children who needed raising," Frank replied. "They were adults who needed boundaries." She flinched. "Frank, I know I made mistakes. I know I should have told you. But I was under so much pressure. Tyler kept insisting it was the right move, and Brooke said you'd understand once everything settled. They twisted everything. They said." Frank shook his head slowly. "No, don't put this on them." Linda stiffened, her breath stuttering. "But they—" "You let it," he said calmly. "They followed your example. Every step you took was calculated. Every choice you made was intentional. Don't rewrite the story now, T." Had its collapsing. Tears spilled again, but the desperation behind them shifted shape. Less sorrow, more strategy. She reached for his arm, but Frank stepped back. "Frank," she pleaded, "I'm your wife. We built a life together. You can't just throw that away. You can't throw me away." "You walked away first," he said, voice quiet but immovable. "When you forged my name, when you sold my home, when you decided your future mattered more than my dignity." Her lips trembled. "I didn't mean to hurt you." "You meant to get what you wanted," he corrected. "And you were willing to cheat, lie, and manipulate to get it." Linda stared at him, searching his face for softness, for the old version of him, the man she used to steer like a ship she believed she owned. But that man was gone, replaced by someone steadier, someone with edges, someone she could no longer bend. She tried one last time, voice lowering into a trembling whisper meant to pierce his resolve. "Frank, please, don't leave me like this. I don't have anyone left." He studied her for a long, quiet moment. Then he stepped back toward the door. "Linda," he said gently, "I didn't leave you." He opened the door. "You left us, long before you ever packed a box." Her face crumpled, shattering into a grief that was less about losing him and more about losing control. She reached out, but Frank didn't take her hand, didn't offer comfort, didn't offer even a flicker of hope. He closed the door. Not slammed, not shoved, just a quiet, final closing that carried more finality than any argument could. On the other side, Frank stood in the stillness of his restored home, breathing slowly. The air felt cleaner, the walls felt lighter. Outside, Linda remained frozen on the porch, staring at the closed door like she'd never seen it before. And in that moment, reality finally settled over her like a weight she could no longer outrun. Her marriage was not slipping away. It was over. The morning the divorce papers went out, the sky over the Carolina shoreline was an iron-gray sheet, heavy, expectant, like even nature sensed something irreversible was about to happen. Frank stood at the small desk inside the beach house, pen poised above a stack of documents bound neatly with Victor's precision. The divorce packet sat open, the accusations clear and stark across the printed page. Fraud, forgery, theft, emotional abuse. The words didn't feel vindictive. They felt accurate. For the first time in years, Frank was naming the truth instead of apologizing for it. Victor stood beside him, adjusting his glasses. "When you sign this, it becomes official, Frank. We're filing immediately." Frank didn't hesitate. The pen scratched across the paper with a sure, steady stroke, nothing like the forged signature Linda had tried to pass as his. This one carried weight, finality, freedom. He closed the folder, exhaled, and handed it to Victor. "Let's file it." By noon, the divorce papers were processed and delivered, straight to the small rental where Linda had been nursing her pride and waiting for Frank to come to his senses. She opened the mailbox expecting bills, maybe a late notice, maybe a letter from a friend offering sympathy. Not this. Not the thick, unmistakable packet stamped with legal authority. She froze in the driveway, staring at the envelope as if it were burning her fingers. Brooke and Tyler stood on the porch, arguing about groceries until they saw her face pale. "Mom," Brooke asked, "what is it?" Linda swallowed, her voice was thin. He filed for divorce." Tyler scoffed. "Good, maybe we can negotiate a settlement. He owes us." "Shut up, Tyler," Linda snapped, the panic cracking through her tone. Her hands shook as she opened the packet, eyes flying across the accusations. "He listed fraud and abuse, and in theft." Her breath hitched. "He's blaming me for everything." Brooke stepped forward, reading over her mother's shoulder. When she reached the line about forged signatures, she flinched. "Mom, did you really?" "Don't start, Brooke," Linda snapped again, too quickly. "I thought he'd understand eventually. I thought he'd come back to talk. This was never supposed to be permanent." But it was, and the weight of that truth finally hit her with full force. Tyler grabbed the papers, flipping through with frantic movements. "What happens to the houses? He can't keep everything." Linda didn't respond. Because she knew. She knew exactly what the prenup said. She knew exactly what her crimes meant. And she knew exactly what Victor would do with all of it. Back at Victor's office, Frank sat calmly as his attorney laid out the next steps. Because of the prenup, Victor explained, Linda is entitled to nothing. No property, no assets, no spousal support. And because she committed fraud, she's in an even weaker position. The court won't give her anything, not even the illusion of leverage. Frank nodded slowly. I'm not trying to punish her financially. I just want her out of my life. This isn't punishment, Victor said. It's consequence. Meanwhile, across town, Linda's children erupted into panic. What are we supposed to do now? Tyler shouted, pacing the tiny living room. He can't just cut us off. You told us we'd be set for life. Brooke sat on the edge of the worn-out sofa, shaking. Mom, please tell me you planned for something else. Anything. But Linda couldn't answer. Because no matter how she spun it, no matter how many lies she told herself, her children, or the neighborhood, Frank had finally done what she never believed he would. He shut the door. Fully. Legally. Permanently. Desperation propelled her into filing a counterclaim that same afternoon, a frantic attempt to paint herself as the victim, to claw for property, for money, for sympathy. She claimed emotional cruelty, abandonment, psychological manipulation, and even suggested that Frank had forced her into the fraudulent sales. Victor dismantled it with the ease of a surgeon, removing a splinter. He walked into the courthouse with a stack of evidence thicker than Linda's claim, and walked out 20 minutes later with the counterclaim dismissed entirely. No rights. No leverage. No foothold. When Linda received the denial, she collapsed into the kitchen chair, staring at the rejected claim like it represented her last breath. How can he do this? She whispered. Brooke whispered back, but her voice carried years of misdirected entitlement. How could you do this, Mom? You said we were safe. Linda covered her face with both hands. The sob that escaped wasn't elegant or manipulative this time. It was raw. It was real. Because everything she'd built on Frank's back, every plan, every scheme, every assumed future, was gone. Back at the beach house, Frank sat at his rebuilt dining table, the divorce decree in front of him. His name at the bottom was firm, confident. Linda's eventual signature would seal the end. Mia slid into the chair beside him. How do you feel? Frank looked at the papers, then out the window toward the ocean. The waves rolled steady, rhythmic, unconcerned with the storms of human betrayal. I feel like, he said slowly, I finally stopped drowning. Linda Wallace lost everything that day. Her marriage, her financial security, her imagined authority, and the reputation she once flaunted. Frank didn't celebrate, he didn't rejoice. He simply closed the folder, exhaled, and prepared for the part of life he hadn't felt in years. Freedom. Frank moved the last cardboard box into the beach house just after sunrise, the soft pink glow warming the sand as if welcoming him back. The air smelled of salt, cedar, and freedom, not the explosive, triumphant kind. No, this was quieter, deeper, a freedom that settled in the bones and reminded a man that breathing didn't have to be work. He set the box down in the living room and looked around slowly. This was home again. Fully, unquestionably, permanently. The walls still bore scuffs and dents from years of weather and time, but they were honest marks, unlike the wounds Linda left behind. The floor creaked in familiar places. Light filtered through the curtains he and Caroline had chosen decades ago. Everything about the house seemed to exhale with him, as if relieved to have him back. Mia arrived 20 minutes later, balancing a tray of coffee and a paper bag of pastries. Dad, she called, nudging the door open with her hip. Didn't think you beat me here. He smiled, a real one, not the weary half-smiles he'd worn through years of emotional compromise. Couldn't sleep, wanted to get started. She set the tray down and hugged him, her arms warm, grounding. Then let's make this place shine again. They spent the next several hours working side by side. Frank sanded down old trim while Mia scrubbed windows until they gleamed. The house filled with the soft scrape of tools, the rhythmic hiss of cleaning spray, the occasional burst of laughter at something Mia said. Not the forced kind, the kind that slips out before you even know it's coming. Bit by bit, the house was coming back to life, and so was Frank. Just after noon, his phone buzzed on the counter. A long string of notifications rolled across the screen, messages from Linda. Dozens. He hesitated only long enough to glance at the preview. "Frank, we need to talk. You're making a mistake. I didn't deserve this. You owe me an explanation. I loved you, you know that. Your daughter twisted you against me. I'm begging you, just answer the phone. How could you do this to us?" The tone shifted with every message: anger, guilt, despair, manipulation, bargaining, nostalgia, fury. Chaos wrapped in text bubbles. Frank placed the phone down without opening a single one. "Dad," Mia asked, pausing mid-scrub, "you okay?" He nodded. "I'm done with that part of my life." She watched him carefully. "Do you want me to block her number?" Frank picked up the phone himself. With a calm, deliberate motion, he opened settings, clicked the contact, and pressed block this caller. The screen dimmed slightly, confirming the action. He exhaled, no loose ends. Mia smiled, small but proud. "You've come a long way." He had. Around mid-afternoon, there was a knock at the front door, steady, familiar. Frank wiped his hands on a towel and opened it to find Sheriff Dean Harper standing on the porch, hat in hand. "Afternoon, Frank," Harper said. "Heard you moved in for good." "Just finished unloading the last box." Harper nodded approvingly. "Good. This place suits you better than that storm back in town." He paused, lowering his voice. "I wanted to stop by and tell you something man to man." Frank raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "You did right," Harper said. "Linda, she crossed lines that don't get uncrossed. What you did wasn't revenge, it was justice. And justice doesn't always make noise." He tapped the porch rail. "Sometimes it's quiet like this." Frank looked out toward the water, where the tide lapped gently at the shore. "Feels quiet." "That's how you know it was earned," Harper replied. "Enjoy your freedom, Frank. You deserve every inch of it." With a respectful nod, the sheriff headed back to his cruiser. Frank watched him drive away, the gravel settling behind the tires like a closing chapter. Mia finished for the day just before sunset, kissing her father's cheek before heading home. "Call me if you need anything," she said, waving as she walked to her car. "I will," Frank promised, and he meant it. But for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like he needed anyone to steady him. He had ground beneath his feet again. As the sun dipped low, Frank stepped out onto the sand, walking slowly along the shoreline. Each step pressed deeper into the wet earth, grounding him in the present. The wind brushed against his face. Waves broke gently at his ankles. Gulls cried overhead, their calls stretching across the evening sky. He breathed in deeply. Then again. And again. It felt different now. Lighter. Real. He'd been carrying invisible chains for years. Guilt, compromise, fear of conflict, the weight of someone else's expectations. Now, with the divorce signed, the lies exposed, and the house restored to its rightful peace, those chains were nothing but memory. He paused at the edge of the surf, staring back at the beach house, the silhouette warm with lamplight, its windows glowing softly in the dusk. This house wasn't just a structure. It wasn't lumber and nails and paint. It was the last unbroken part of the man he used to be, and the first restored part of the man he was becoming again. Caroline's laughter lived in those walls. Mia's childhood footsteps. His own heartbeat, steadying again piece by piece. and now it held something new. His freedom. He stood there until the horizon swallowed the last bit of sun, letting the quiet wash through him like a balm. Freedom didn't roar. It whispered. And tonight Frank finally heard it. The first hammers struck the beach house at dawn. Sharp, rhythmic, purposeful. Frank stood on the sand barefoot, coffee warming his hands as he watched the construction crew begin removing the warped boards of the old deck. Sunlight spilled across the shoreline, touching the workers' tool belts, the ladders leaning against the siding, the stacks of fresh lumber waiting to become part of something new. Something reborn. For months, this house had carried the shadow of Linda's betrayal, her fingerprints on forged documents, her voice in every corner where she'd insisted the house didn't matter. But now, as the old deck came apart plank by plank, Frank felt that shadow peeling away with it. By mid-morning, new boards were going in, smooth, pale, smelling of cut pine. Every nail driven into place felt like stitching a wound closed. Every removed splinter felt like letting go of mething that never should have been held. Mia arrived with lunch, stepping onto the sand with the grace of someone who'd grown up on the shoreline. She set the bags down, brushed the wind from her hair, and immediately smiled. "It's starting to look like itself again," she said. Frank nodded, "Feels like it too." As the crew continued working, Mia walked inside. She returned a moment later with a small box tucked under her arm. "Found this in storage," she said softly. "I thought maybe today was the right time." Frank hesitated. He knew that box. Caroline had kept it in the bedroom closet for years, a collection of old Polaroids, ticket stubs from beach fairs, photos of toddler Mia on Frank's shoulders, pictures of the house during construction. He opened the lid. The first photo inside was of him and Caroline standing on the foundation of the house, shoulder to shoulder, sawdust in their hair. She was laughing, her head tilted back, her smile wide enough to brighten any storm. Frank swallowed hard. "You don't have to look at all of them today," Mia said gently. "No," he murmured, "I want to." For the first time since Caroline's death, long before Linda's betrayal, long before life had hardened around grief, Frank let the memories in without choking on them. The photos weren't ghosts haunting him anymore. They were reminders of the life he had built with intention, with love, with honesty. He sat on the porch steps, flipping through them slowly. There was Caroline painting the trim, with a streak of blue smeared on her cheek. There was Mia running across the unfinished deck, pigtails flying. There was Frank himself, young, determined, proud. A man who believed a home could be a sanctuary. Mia sat beside him, resting her head on his shoulder. "She'd be proud of you, Dad, for fighting back, for choosing yourself." Frank didn't answer right away. His throat was tight, but for once the emotion didn't scare him. It didn't feel like a failure of strength. It felt like a return to it. "I never let myself grieve properly," he said at last. "After she died, I just tried to fill the silence, fill the space. I didn't know how to be alone, and I think that's why I let Linda take so much." Mia squeezed his arm. "But you're not alone now, and you're not the man she could walk over anymore." He nodded, tears blurring the edges of the photos. "No, I'm not." For the first time in a decade, he shared everything. The fear he carried after Caroline passed, the guilt, the loneliness, the regret of marrying someone who chipped away at his confidence inch by inch. Mia listened with open eyes, open heart. No judgment, just love. It was the final release he didn't know he'd been needing. By afternoon, the new deck was taking shape, stretching wide like open arms toward the ocean. Fresh windows were set into place, clear and unblemished, allowing sunlight to pour into the home in bright, golden beams. Painters worked along the siding, brushing new life into the wood with strokes of warm, coastal white. The house wasn't just being restored. It was being reborn from the inside out. Later, neighbors wandered over with curious smiles and friendly waves. The older couple from across the way brought a pie. Another neighbor carried 2 folding chairs for the porch. A retired fisherman dropped by with stories about watching Frank build the original deck with more sweat than sense. "Good to see you taking back what's yours," the fisherman said. "Takes guts, takes backbone." Frank accepted each kindness with humility, steady, grounded, grateful. And as the sun dipped low, turning the waves copper and gold, he walked through the house one more time. The floors felt solid beneath him. The walls felt warm. The air felt clean. This home had survived storms, both weather and human. And now it was becoming a haven again. A place of peace. A place of rebirth. A place that reflected the man he was becoming. Frank stepped onto the new deck, hands in his pockets, letting the ocean wind wrap around him. "I swear," he murmured, voice steady, absolute, "no one will ever take this from me again." And for the first time in a long time, the house seemed to answer him, not with words, but with the quiet certainty of a home finally restored to the man who built it. By early fall, the ripple effects of Linda's downfall had finally turned into waves, loud, crashing, unavoidable. Frank heard most of it secondhand, pieces carried to him on the coastal breeze by neighbors, clerks, and the small-town rumor mill that never slept. Tyler was the first to hit the ground. After weeks of missed payments, ignored notices, and angry calls from his landlord, Tyler was officially evicted from his rental. The sheriff's office posted the papers on his door at sunrise, and by afternoon his belongings were stacked on the curb: faded clothes, cracked gaming equipment, boxes that had seen better years. He stood in the street shouting about unfair treatment, threatening lawsuits, promi, saying he would be back on top soon. No one believed him, not even Brooke. Brooke had already retreated into a different kind of collapse, quiet, exhausted, defeated. Her job had cut her hours after she called in too many times during the chaos with Linda. Creditors started calling, then calling again, then calling every hour. She finally gave up her rental and moved back in with her mother, their finances twisted together like 2 sinking ships dragging each other under. Frank didn't celebrate it, but he didn't intervene either. He had spent years patching over Linda's failures, smoothing over her children's irresponsibility, carrying burdens that were never his. And now, as their world unraveled under the weight of their own choices, he realized something profound. He didn't owe any of them rescue. Not anymore. Tyler tried reaching out once, leaving a half-hearted message about misunderstandings and working things out. Frank deleted it without replying. Brooke didn't call at all. She understood the silence she'd earned. But Linda refused to accept the finality of what she had lost. One gray morning, Frank received a sharp knock on his door, a courier delivering yet another thick envelope. Another lawsuit, another attempt to claw her way back into a life she had sabotaged. She accused Frank of emotional manipulation, marital abandonment, and even financial sabotage, claiming she had been forced to commit the fraudulent sales because Frank created an environment of scarcity. Victor reviewed it, sighed, and filed a motion for immediate dismissal. The court tossed the case out within minutes. Frank didn't even have to show up. Linda's panic escalated. She started stopping neighbors on their morning walks, pulling aside church members, cornering people at the grocery store, insisting she had been wronged, insisting Frank owed her a second chance, insisting she missed the man she ruined. The phrasing alone made townspeople recoil. Missed the man she ruined. Even in her desperation, she couldn't hide the truth of what she had done. Whispers started to turn against her, not cruelly but inevitably. People weren't ignoring her, they were watching her unravel, and they knew exactly who had pulled the first thread. Meanwhile, Frank's life was moving in the opposite direction, forward, upward, steadier with each passing day. He spent his mornings repairing beams, replacing siding, reinforcing the deck railing. His afternoons with Mia, reviewing finances, organizing documents, walking through habits and boundaries he'd never given himself permission to enforce. "You've always taken care of everyone else," Mia said one evening as they sorted through old paperwork. "Now it's your turn to take care of you." Frank nodded, feeling the truth of it settle inside him. "I guess I never realized how much space I'd given away." "You're taking it back," she said softly, "piece by piece." And he was. The beach house glowed now, new paint catching the sunlight in warm hues, windows so clear the ocean's reflection looked like glass artwork. Neighbors visited with compliments, each one a quiet affirmation that Frank had rebuilt not just a house, but a life. He no longer checked Linda's messages, no longer entertained her attempts at rewriting history, no longer felt that reflexive guilt she once used to anchor him. One evening, as the sky dimmed and waves brushed rhythmically against the shore, Frank stepped out onto the deck with a sense of stillness he'd almost forgotten how to feel. Somewhere across town, Linda was spiraling, grasping at stories, sympathy, control, anything that kept her from facing the truth of her downfall. But Frank didn't need to witness it. He didn't need to respond. He didn't need revenge. Letting the consequences speak for themselves was its own form of justice. And in that soft, fading light, as the breeze moved gently through the newly restored beams, Frank found peace, not in victory, not in punishment, but in release. Everything Linda lost, she had taken from herself. And everything Frank regained, he rebuilt with his own hands. The beach house glowed with warm lamplight and the soft clatter of dishes as Mia arranged the final touches on the dining table. Outside, the late autumn breeze swept in off the water, carrying scents of salt, grilled seafood, and something Frank hadn't felt in a long time. "Peace." Frank stepped back from the kitchen counter, wiping his hands on a towel while the slow murmur of friendly conversation drifted through the open windows. A few close friends from town had arrived, people who'd known him before Linda, before the chaos, before betrayal had hollowed out the center of his life. They chatted quietly on the newly rebuilt deck, admiring the craftsmanship, the view, the calm. For the first time in years, Frank didn't feel the need to hide the weariness in his eyes. It was gone. Not overnight, but piece by piece, peeled away through truth, justice, and yielding. This was his home again, not a battleground, a place where laughter could echo without feeling like an intrusion. Mia slid up beside him. "You ready, Dad?" He nodded. "Yeah, I think I am." They stepped outside together, the group turning toward him with easy smiles. The ocean behind them shimmered gold under the sinking sun. Frank picked up his glass. Nothing fancy, just a simple drink in a simple house, but somehow more meaningful than anything Linda had ever tried to manufacture. He cleared his throat softly. "I'm not much for speeches," he began, earning a few chuckles, "but I wanted to say something tonight." Everyone quieted. Mia stood close, hand gently touching his arm. "This year has been something I never expected to live through," Frank said. "Losing trust, losing stability, losing myself almost." He paused, eyes traveling over faces that had stood by him when things fell apart. "But sometimes a battle forces you to see what matters and what never did." He lifted his glass slightly. "To keeping what matters." Those 4 words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything he'd fought through: the forged documents, the lies, the betrayal, the fear of losing the last piece of his first life with Caroline. They carried the strength of every board he'd replaced, every choice he'd made to reclaim himself rather than crumble. Glasses clinked gently under the golden sky. The evening unfolded with laughter, real laughter, not the brittle, rehearsed kind Linda used to perform in front of guests. Stories flowed, memories resurfaced, and the new deck held everyone comfortably, like it had been built for moments exactly like this. Frank watched Mia as she chatted with one of the neighbors, her eyes bright, her gestures animated. She had been his anchor through the storm, his reminder of truth, of loyalty, of the man he used to be before grief and loneliness made him vulnerable to Linda's charm. After dessert, Mia walked over and leaned her shoulder against his. "You look lighter," she said quietly. "I feel lighter." She studied him for a moment, then smiled softly. "I'm proud of you, Dad, not just for what you survived, but for choosing yourself this time, for choosing peace." Frank breathed deeply, his chest expanding with the clean salt air. "I didn't realize how long I'd been carrying everything, how much I'd given up just to avoid conflict." "You don't have to do that anymore," Mia said. "Not here, not with me, not in this house." He glanced around, the glowing windows, the flickering candles, the hum of soft conversation and ocean waves blending into a gentle evening symphony. "It feels alive again," he said, "almost like it used to." "Maybe even better," Mia replied, "because now you know what it took to keep it." As dinner wound down, the small group drifted toward the railing to watch the sky fade into streaks of amber, rose, and deepening blue. Frank stepped away for a quiet moment and walked to the far end of the deck. The ocean stretched endlessly before him, its surface catching the last ember of sunlight. He closed his eyes, letting the breeze wash over him, soft and cool. No tension pinched his shoulders. No dread shadowed his thoughts. No voice in the back of his mind told him to brace for the next blow. He was unburdened. The house behind him hummed with warmth and renewal. The water before him whispered promise and peace. The sunset painted a horizon that glowed with beginnings, not endings. For the first time in years, maybe decades, Frank felt aligned with his life, his choices, his future. He opened his eyes and watched the sun disappear below the waves, leaving behind a sky full of quiet colors. It wasn't just a sunset. It was a mirror of the man he had become. Steady, restored, and finally free. The first light of dawn spilled across the shoreline in pale ribbons, soft blues, quiet golds, a calm that felt almost sacred. Frank walked barefoot along the cool sand, each step sinking just enough to remind him he was grounded again, present again, alive again. The waves rolled in gently, whispering against the shore with the steady rhythm of breath. For the first time in as long as he could remember, Frank felt no weight pressing down on him. No dread coiled in his stomach. No old resentments whispering from the corners of his mind. Just peace. He stopped near the water's edge, watching the slow pulse of the tide. Betrayal had once felt like a wound that would never close, a break so deep it fractured his sense of self. But standing in the quiet dawn, he realized something far more powerful. Betrayal didn't define him. His response did. He had survived deceit, manipulation, humiliation, and loss, and come out not bitter but whole, stronger, more himself than he had been in years. Justice had come, not loudly but steadily, in legal documents, in a reclaimed home, in the silence that followed Linda's downfall. Frank breathed in deeply, letting the fresh morning air fill him. Ray. Newell wasn't a single moment. It was a long walk back to yourself. Footsteps crunched softly behind him. He turned to see Mia approaching, wrapped in a light sweater, her hair pulled back, her smile warm despite the early hour. She didn't say anything at first. She simply stepped beside him and slipped her arm through his, leaning gently against him as they faced the horizon together. They stood in silence, watching the sunlight grow stronger, brushing gold across the surface of the water. "You up early?" she finally said softly. "Couldn't sleep," Frank replied. "Thought I'd walk a bit, thought it might help me settle everything that's happened." Mia rested her head lightly against his shoulder. "Does it?" He nodded, more than I expected. Another moment passed, quiet, peaceful, the kind of morning that felt like it belonged only to them. "Dad," Mia said, "after everything, how do you feel now, really feel?" Frank considered the question carefully, not rushing, not avoiding, just telling the truth the way he'd learned to do again. "I thought revenge would feel good," he said. "For a while I thought that's what I was after, to make Linda face everything she tried to destroy." He paused as the breeze washed over them. "But standing here now, I realize revenge was never the point." Mia looked up at him, eyes soft, listening. "It was always about freedom," he said. "Getting my life back, my peace, my identity." They both turned to look at the beach house in the distance. New deck gleaming in the early light, windows bright, paint fresh. It stood tall, solid, unshaken. A survivor just like him. The house had endured storms, both literal and emotional. It had survived neglect, misuse, and the threat of being sold out from under him. But it stood. And so did he. "That place," Frank murmured, "it wasn't just a building. It held everything I ever built, everything I lost, and everything I still had left." "It held you," Mia said gently. Frank's throat tightened, not with sadness but with a fierce, quiet gratitude. "Yeah, it did." They walked a little further down the shore, the tide nipping at their feet, gulls circling above in loose arcs. The world felt new again, open, wide, full of possibility instead of fear. "I don't know what comes next," Frank admitted. "But for the first time in a long time, I'm not scared of the future. I'm ready for it." Mia squeezed his arm. "Whatever you choose next, it's yours, not someone else's plan, not someone else's control." Frank nodded. "Exactly." They turned back toward the beach house, standing resilient against the morning light. A home restored, a life reclaimed, a man rebuilt. As they reached the steps, Frank paused, taking in every detail. The sound of the waves, the warmth of the rising sun, the steadiness in his chest he once thought he'd lost forever. He placed a hand on the railing, feeling the smooth grain beneath his palm, and spoke the final truth of the journey that had transformed him. "She took her shot, but I kept my home, my dignity, and my life."